You've been told that container gardening means constant watering, endless repotting, and plants that barely survive winter. What if I told you that's completely backwards? Some of the toughest perennials on Earth actually prefer the confines of a pot, coming back year after year with less work than your average houseplant. If you're ready to discover which perennials will transform your patio into a self-sustaining garden that laughs in the face of neglect, smash that like button and let's dive into something that'll change how you think about container gardening forever. Hey there, garden friends! I'm so glad you're here with me today. And if you want more no-nonsense gardening advice that actually works in real American backyards, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Picture this. It's early spring, and while your neighbors are frantically starting seeds and amending beds, you're sipping coffee on your deck watching your pots come alive with zero effort. That's the magic of perennial container gardening, and it starts with choosing plants that were practically designed for this lifestyle. The first one I want to share with you is a plant that most people kill in garden beds, but absolutely thrives when you give it the constraint of a container. Lavender is that beautiful contradiction that confuses so many gardeners. You see those gorgeous purple spikes and think it needs pampering, but the truth is lavender wants to struggle just a little bit. In the ground, especially in regions with heavy clay or humid summers like the Southeast, lavender often drowns or develops root rot. But in a pot, it becomes nearly indestructible. The drainage is perfect, you control the soil quality, and the roots stay warm and dry exactly the way this Mediterranean native prefers. English lavender varieties work brilliantly from New England down through the mid-Atlantic, surviving winters that dip well below zero when you move the pot against a south-facing wall. In hotter regions like Texas or Arizona, go for Spanish or French lavender, which handles heat better. Use a terracotta pot because it breathes and wicks away excess moisture. Fill it with a gritty mix. That's maybe half potting soil and half perlite or sand, and water only when the top 2 inches feel completely dry. The biggest mistake people make is treating lavender like a thirsty annual, drowning it with kindness. Let it dry out between waterings, give it 6 hours of full sun, and trim it back by about a third after it flowers to keep it compact and bushy. Here's something most people don't realize. Lavender in containers actually produces more concentrated essential oils than field-grown plants because the slight stress intensifies the fragrance. Your whole patio will smell like a spa from June through August, and you can cut stems to dry for sachets or cooking all season long. Have you ever grown lavender successfully? Or have you been one of those gardeners who's killed it 3 times and given up? Now, let's talk about a plant that sounds intimidating, but is actually one of the most forgiving perennials you can grow in a pot. And it happens to be a pollinator magnet that'll bring your container garden to life. Coneflowers, or echinacea if you want to get fancy, are prairie natives that evolved to handle drought, temperature swings, and poor soil, which makes them absolutely perfect for container life. The classic purple coneflower is native to the central and eastern United States, so it's genetically programmed to handle everything from the humidity of Georgia to the cold of Michigan. These plants develop deep tap roots in the ground, but in containers they adapt by creating a dense fibrous root system that's incredibly efficient. A 16-inch pot is plenty for one plant, And if you use a good quality potting mix with some compost mixed in, you'll barely need to fertilize. Cone flowers bloom from early summer straight through to fall, especially if you deadhead the spent flowers. But here's the lazy gardener's secret. If you leave some of those seed heads on the plant going into winter, goldfinches will visit your patio like it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. The dried seed heads also add winter interest, standing up through snow and ice with an architectural beauty that keeps your containers from looking dead and forgotten. In terms of care, coneflowers want full sun, but they'll tolerate partial shade, especially in southern states where afternoon shade actually helps the blooms last longer. Water when the soil dries out an inch down, but don't stress if you forget for a few days because these plants are drought tolerant once established. They rarely get pests, they don't need staking, and they come in colors now that go way beyond purple if you want to experiment with coral, white, yellow, or even crazy double-petaled varieties. One thing that surprised me, coneflowers in pots actually bloom longer than the ones in my garden beds because I can move them to exactly the right light conditions as the season progresses. What's your experience with coneflowers? And have you tried any of the newer color varieties? Here's a perennial that most people associate with formal English gardens, but it's secretly one of the toughest container plants for American gardeners who want color without the fuss. Daylilies have this reputation for being old-fashioned or boring, but that's only because they were so common in grandmother's gardens that we stopped appreciating how ridiculously resilient they are. These plants will survive neglect that would kill almost anything else, and in containers they become even more manageable because you can control their spread. In garden beds, daylilies can take over and become almost weedy, but in a pot, they stay perfectly contained while still producing dozens of blooms throughout the summer. The key is choosing the right varieties because not all daylilies are created equal for container life. Look for compact or dwarf varieties that top out around 18 to 24 inches tall rather than the giant ones that can reach 4 feet. Stella de Oro is the classic choice, and it's popular for good reason, reblooming continuously from late spring until frost with cheerful golden yellow flowers. But there are thousands of varieties now in every color, except true blue, from deep burgundy to pale pink, to bicolor combinations that look almost hand-painted. Daylilies adapt to practically any climate across the continental United States. They handle heat and humidity in Florida, cold winters in Minnesota, and everything in between. The only thing they really dislike is being waterlogged, which is why containers work so beautifully, because excess water drains away. Use a pot that's at least 14 inches wide, fill it with standard potting soil, and place it where it'll get at least 6 hours of sun for the best flowering, though they'll tolerate some shade and still bloom reasonably well. Water regularly during the growing season, but they can handle some drought once established, and here's the beautiful part. Daylilies in containers rarely need dividing. In the ground, you're supposed to dig them up and divide the roots every few years. But in a pot, they seem to self-regulate and stay productive for years without intervention. Feed them once in spring with a slow-release fertilizer and maybe once more in midsummer. And that's honestly all they need. The spent flowers look a bit messy, so snap them off if you're feeling ambitious, but if you're truly lazy, just let them be, because Each flower only lasts one day anyway, and new ones keep opening. Did you know that daylily buds and flowers are actually edible and taste slightly sweet with a crisp texture? They're delicious in salads or stir-fries, which gives you yet another reason to grow them on your patio. Let me share something that completely changed my mind about what's possible in container gardening, and it's a plant that most people think needs acres of space. Hostas are shade-loving perennials that everyone assumes belong in woodland gardens, but they're actually phenomenal in pots and solve that age-old problem of what to grow on a shady balcony or porch. These plants come in an absurd variety of sizes, from miniatures that fit in a 6-inch pot to giant specimens with leaves the size of dinner plates. The foliage is the real attraction here, with colors ranging from deep blue-green to chartreuse to variegated patterns that look like someone hand-painted every leaf. Hostas are native to Asia, but they've naturalized across most of the United States and handle cold winters remarkably well, going completely dormant and then emerging fresh each spring like magic. The beauty of growing hostas in containers is that you can move them around to find that perfect spot with bright indirect light or dappled shade, and you completely avoid the slug problem that plagues them in garden beds. Slugs have a much harder time reaching container plants, especially if you elevate the pot slightly or add a copper ring around the rim. Use a large container, at least 16 inches for medium-sized varieties, and fill it with rich potting soil that holds moisture well, because hostas are one of the few perennials that actually like consistent watering. They're not swamp plants, but they appreciate soil that stays evenly moist, especially during hot summers. In northern states, they handle full shade beautifully, but in hotter southern climates, they actually benefit from some morning sun as long as they're protected during the intense afternoon heat. Feed them once in spring when the leaves emerge, and maybe once more in early summer, and that's all they need. Here's what surprised me most. Hostas in containers rarely get those ragged brown leaf edges that happen in the ground during dry spells, probably because it's easier to keep the soil moisture consistent in a pot. Most varieties send up flower stalks in midsummer with white or lavender blooms that smell sweet and attract hummingbirds. Though honestly, the foliage is so gorgeous that the flowers are just a bonus. You can leave hostas in their containers year after year, and they'll slowly fill out and become more impressive with age. Have you discovered any favorite hosta varieties? Or are you still convinced they're too boring for your space? Now here's a myth-busting moment that's going to save you so much frustration. Everyone thinks ornamental grasses are high maintenance or only work in huge landscape installations, but compact varieties are absolutely perfect for lazy container gardeners. Blue fescue is my go-to recommendation because it stays small, looks incredible year-round, and asks for almost nothing in return. This grass forms tight clumps of silvery blue foliage that move beautifully in the breeze and provide texture that makes every other plant in your container display look better by comparison. Blue fescue is evergreen in mild climates and semi-evergreen even in colder regions, meaning you get visual interest during winter when most perennials have died back completely. It's tough enough for northern winters and heat-tolerant enough for southern summers, though it appreciates some afternoon shade in the hottest parts of the country like Arizona or southern Texas. The growth habit stays naturally compact at around 8 to 12 inches tall and wide, so it never gets unruly or needs dividing. Planted in a pot with excellent drainage. Use a lean soil mix rather than something rich and heavy, and water sparingly, because this grass actually prefers conditions on the dry side. Overwatering is the only real way to kill blue fescue. So if you're the type who forgets to water your containers, this plant will actually thank you for the neglect. It sends up delicate flower spikes in late spring that start out wheat-colored and fade to tan, adding even more texture and movement. You can trim the whole plant back by about half in early spring if it's looking shabby, but that's optional rather than necessary. Blue fescue pairs beautifully with flowering perennials because the cool blue color makes warm-toned blooms like coral or yellow pop, and the fine texture contrasts with bold leaves. One designer trick is to use blue fescue as a thriller in mixed containers, or as a solo specimen in a beautiful pot, where its architectural form can really shine. What shade-loving or texture-adding plants have worked best in your container garden? I saved the one that surprised me most for last, and it's a perennial that breaks every rule about what supposedly works in pots. Sedum, especially the upright varieties like Autumn Joy, are succulents that store water in their thick leaves and basically thrive on neglect. These plants laugh at forgotten watering schedules, handle temperature extremes from below zero to scorching heat, and look stunning from spring through winter. In early spring, the new growth emerges as tight rosettes of jade green leaves that are beautiful, even without flowers. As summer progresses, the plant fills out into a dense mound, and then in late summer, it produces flat flower heads that start out pale green, turn pink, then deepen to rust red, and finally age to bronze seed heads that stand through winter, providing food for birds and architectural interest when everything else looks dead. Sedum works across the entire United States, from cold New England winters to hot southern summers, because it's just that adaptable. The only thing it cannot tolerate is wet feet, which makes containers absolutely perfect, because drainage is guaranteed. Use a pot with drainage holes, fill it with cactus mix, or regular potting soil amended with extra perlite or sand, and place it in full sun for the best flowering and most compact growth. Water deeply but infrequently, letting the soil dry out completely between waterings, and resist the urge to fertilize because too much nutrition makes sedum floppy and weak-stemmed. The plant might flop anyway if it's in too much shade, but in full sun it stays sturdy and upright without any staking. Butterflies and bees absolutely mob the flowers in late summer when not much else is blooming, making your patio a pollinator paradise. Here's the incredible part. You can propagate sedum by literally breaking off a piece and sticking it in soil, and it'll root and grow into a new plant with almost no effort. If the mother plant gets too large for its container after several years, just divide it in spring, pot up the divisions, and suddenly you have gifts for all your gardening friends. Sedum is also one of those rare perennials that actually looks better slightly pot-bound, producing more flowers and staying more compact when the roots are a bit crowded. Think about combining sedum with other drought-tolerant perennials like lavender or ornamental grasses for a container display that could survive a 2-week vacation without any care whatsoever. Has sedum found a place in your garden yet? Or does this sound like exactly what your lazy gardening style has been missing? So there you have it, a collection of perennials that will transform your containers from high-maintenance headaches into self-sustaining little ecosystems that come back bigger and better every year. The secret isn't finding plants that need constant attention. It's choosing the ones that actually prefer a bit of benign neglect and matching them to containers where they can truly thrive. When you stop fighting against a plant's nature and instead work with what it wants, gardening stops being a chore and starts being pure joy. These perennials prove that you don't need a big yard or endless hours to create something beautiful and alive right outside your door. Container gardening with perennials gives you flexibility to experiment, to move things around until they're perfect, and to create a garden that evolves and improves with time rather than starting from scratch every spring. Which of these tough, beautiful perennials are you most excited to try in your own containers? And do you have a favorite spot picked out already? If this video opened your eyes to what's possible with perennial container gardening, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and stick around for more practical advice that actually works in real American gardens. Drop a comment and let me know which plant surprised you most. And I'll see you in the next one.